Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome to today's session from Storytelling to Social Impact, Lessons from Exemplar Entertainment Media Interventions. We're glad to have you all here. Thank you for joining. We are going to go ahead and get started. We assume people will continue to trickle in today, but we have a jam-packed session. We don't want to waste a single minute. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And as we do so, I'm going to start by sharing a bit about our interpretation for today. We will remind everyone in the chat as well, but we will have both French to English and English to French interpretation today. It's important to make sure that you select a language, as we have one speaker who will be presenting in French and three other speakers who will be in English. So please take a moment to locate the globe icon at the bottom of your screen or at your control panel on Zoom. I'd recommend that you go ahead and switch to the language that best suits you, either English or French. And this will allow you to follow along to today's presentations. And you're also welcome to respond in your preferred language. For today's webinar, we are going to be primarily using the Q&A box. So there's a Q&A icon that will appear once it's opened at the bottom of your screen or your control box as well. You can use that to type in questions. We will be responding live, and we will also make sure to answer some of those questions live. We'll have the chat box open on and off, but in order for you to get a feel of the chat box for today, we're going to open it now and ask you to tell us about yourself. Say hello, share your name, location, organization, and for today's special trick, our special trick for each of us today is a piece of media, radio, television, book, song that had a significant impact on you personally or professionally. So please go ahead and share that information in the chat, which should be open. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to briefly introduce myself. My name is Hunter Davis. I'm a research program manager at the Center on Gender Equity and Health at the University of California, San Diego. I'm joined by many fabulous colleagues today, but from UCSD, we've got Sarah Smith, Rebecca Lundgren, Courtney McLernan, Princess Luna, and Beth Larson, who are all joining to help facilitate today's call. And Beth will be the one taking us through most of today's content. So I'll give everyone just a minute or two to start sharing in the chat, and then we'll move on to our next activity. Please go ahead and start sharing. And maybe, Sarah, if you don't mind, could you put the prompt in the chat as well so that as people continue to trickle in, they can respond? That would be great. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and move us forward. Again, we've got a lot to cover in a very short bit of time today. So today we are going to start by sharing our findings from a global evidence review, then highlight a few key different findings that stood out to our team in reviewing the literature. For each of those key findings, we'll feature a different speaker sharing their learnings from a program which surfaced during our evidence review with a short moderated discussion. Then we're going to wrap up today with a few special acknowledgements and sharing what's next in our work. So as many of you might be aware, this is the third in a series of 3 webinars focused on sharing information and really sharing all of the information that we found from our evidence review. And so we're glad you're able to join us. If you're interested in reviewing the other 2, we'll share the other 2 webinars that were completed. We will share that information in the chat as well. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Beth, who's going to take us through the first portion of our slides today. Beth, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Hunter. So, as Hunter said, my name is Beth Larson, and I am a postdoctoral fellow at the Center on Gender Equity and Health. I'm typically based in Baltimore, but I'm currently on the West Coast of the US outside of Seattle. So, very excited to be here with all of you today. And I'm going to take us through an overview of our evidence review and then highlight many of the key findings related to the power of how entertainment media can work to shift norms. Next slide. The overarching objective of our scoping review was to assess and synthesize evidence to explore the relationship between social norms and key behaviors and livelihood outcomes of adolescent girls and young women in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Next slide. The review consists of 4 modules. The first provides an overview of the context and approaches that guided the review, followed by a module exploring how social norms drive outcomes. Finally, our third and fourth modules aim to shed light on what works for norm-shifting interventions that include entertainment media components or faith and cultural champions. This webinar will focus on the findings from Module 3, using entertainment media to shift norms. Next slide. To ensure a rigorous approach, we engaged a multidisciplinary advisory board to develop and vet our research questions and protocol. To identify peer-reviewed publications, we conducted searches of key databases, and we identified gray literature via a systematic website search and stakeholder recommendations. We included articles if they aim to improve the livelihood outcomes for adolescents and young people aged 10 to 24. They took place in sub-Saharan Africa and/or South Asia, and they addressed the relationship between social norms and health and well-being outcomes via research or an intervention. And we extracted the key data from each of the identified resources, which we analyzed using descriptive and thematic analyses. And we also validated the data and our findings through sense-making workshops, multiple sense-making workshops, to ensure our analysis approach was sound. Next slide. As I mentioned, our review focused strongly on norm-shifting interventions, which shaped our inclusion criteria. A norm-shifting intervention is designed to change collective perceptions and behaviors, aiming to increase the belief that a desired behavior is acceptable, common, and/or becoming more widespread. With this in mind, we included interventions that aim to shift inaccurate perceptions about others' attitudes and behaviors, interventions that aim to increase the perception that a selected behavior is common or is becoming more common, and finally, interventions that were designed to shift norms, meaning that programs that unintentionally shifted norms were not included in our review. And while interventions varied, their approaches typically identified the social norms and reference groups that were relevant to the behaviors of interest and engaged those reference groups in the interventions. They also sought to bring about change at the community rather than the individual level. They confronted power imbalances, such as those related to gender and age, and they created or reinforced positive norms to support healthy behaviors. Next slide. Throughout this presentation, we have classified interventions into several categories to better understand what works. Given that program evaluations have only recently begun to measure social norms, and that the body of evidence on the effectiveness of social norm shifting interventions is still growing, we considered both qualitative and quantitative results to ensure a holistic understanding of the evidence. We assessed whether an intervention had positive, neutral, negative, or unclear evidence of effectiveness by each domain area we explored. And so this included child, early, and forced marriage, gender-based violence, sexual and reproductive health, and women's economic empowerment. And then we also evaluated each intervention by the outcome areas that we considered. So social norms, attitudes, and behaviors. And taking this approach meant that an intervention's effectiveness often varied across domains and outcomes, which provided additional nuance to our review findings. Positive evidence were findings that showed statistically significant shifts in social norms, attitudes, or behaviors in a positive direction. Negative evidence were results that showed statistically significant shifts in social norms, attitudes, or behaviors in a negative direction. And neutral evidence were results which had some indication of a shift in norms or behaviors or attitudes, but not clearly positive or negative. And this, we also included the qualitative results in the neutral category. And finally, we classified interventions as unclear when they had little documentation and lacked sufficient evidence to classify them in another category. Next slide. So overall, we identified a geographically and methodologically diverse evidence base that has been steadily increasing over time. And this is exciting because it shows strong promise for norm shifting interventions moving forward. Next slide. And so now I'm going to transition into the main focus of this webinar, which is the use of entertainment media in norm shifting interventions. Next slide. We chose to focus on entertainment media for two reasons. First, these interventions change what audiences view as acceptable and reshape what people consider normal, creating the space and enabling environments for more positive norms to develop. Second, interventions that use entertainment media create storylines that depict characters that change over time and develop new perspectives. Youth and other audiences identify with this, meaning that they can see themselves and their peers go through a similar change process and develop more healthy and positive behaviors, attitudes, and social norms. Next slide. As part of the entertainment media portion of our review, we initially identified 4,395 peer-reviewed studies and 211 pieces of gray literature. After removing duplicates and going through the title and abstract screening, 99 peer-reviewed articles and 211 pieces of gray literature were selected for full review. Of this, we included 35 peer-reviewed and 25 pieces of gray literature in our review. Because some interventions had multiple pieces of literature, this yielded 49 distinct interventions that had an entertainment media component. We excluded articles for many reasons, but one of the primary reasons that they were excluded was due to a lack of a social norms component. Next slide. The majority of the interventions that included an entertainment media component, took place in sub-Saharan Africa and worked in the family planning and gender-based violence domains. The fewest number of interventions worked in women's economic empowerment, highlighting a gap in program implementation. Next slide. They addressed multiple overlapping norms, which most often included those related to gender-based violence and fertility. In contrast, norms related to social systems, to decision-making, communication, and agency, to the body, and to economic opportunities were the least addressed. Next slide. Of the 49 included interventions, 31 had an actual social norms measure. Because a primary focus of this webinar is on how interventions work to shift norms, I will focus on the results of those interventions in several of the findings that I share. However, if you want to learn more about how the interventions shifted behaviors or attitudes for any of the results that I share, you can see them in the full report. Here, we see that across the 31 interventions, norms shifted in a positive direction, regardless of the number of media channels used. And we can see this across most of the domains, where the blue portions of the bars, or the count of the interventions that resulted in positive shifts in social norms by domain and intervention strategy, are at least as large as the yellow portions, but especially for sexual and reproductive health and gender-based violence. Next slide. A proven way to shift social norms is to target reference groups in the intervention. Here, we further focus on the interventions that addressed either sexual and reproductive health or gender-based violence. Again, with the blue representing the count of interventions that positively shifted norms by domain and engaged reference group, and the yellow representing interventions with neutral social norms outcomes. What we learn is that while interventions working on sexual and reproductive health were most successful when they targeted health workers and religious leaders, those working on gender-based violence found their success targeting families and community members. In other words, the most important reference groups to engage may vary by intervention domain and other contextual factors. For the greatest chance of intervention effectiveness, it is essential for interventions to correctly identify those influential people before implementation via formative research and other community engagement approaches. Next slide. Still, while entertainment media interventions did target reference groups, few engaged community members and almost none worked with adolescents to design, implement, or monitor the intervention. For instance, when we look at the total column, 11 of the 49 interventions engaged community members in the intervention design, compared to only 3 that included adolescents. And this is a trend that we see continue for both implementation and for monitoring. Furthermore, when we look across domains, other than child early and forced marriage, there are more green cells highlighted under community members than adolescents. Again, highlighting the increased involvement of community members when compared to adolescents. The results in this table demonstrate that community member and adolescent engagement in the design, implementation, and monitoring of an intervention represents one of the greatest areas for improvement for norm-shifting interventions with entertainment media components. Next slide. Regarding measurement, there is also room for growth. For example, while interventions typically used rigorous evaluation designs, such as randomized control trials or quasi-experimental approaches, the majority lacked a qualitative component, limiting our ability to have a more nuanced understanding of how and why interventions did or did not shift social norms, attitudes, and behaviors. Additionally, on the right, we see that while the number of interventions that reported on their social norms measurement approach has been increasing, the vast majority are creating new measures rather than learning from and building on those from previous interventions, which we see with the dark blue bars increasing over time. This has resulted in interventions that often rely on attitudinal proxy measures instead of measuring social norms directly, and has left an untapped potential for social network analysis, which was used in only 2 of the interventions. Next slide. And so now we're going to dive into the main portion of our webinar, where we are going to hear from 3 exemplar interventions that highlight some of the key findings from our evidence review. Next slide. The first finding that we want to highlight is that blending in-person and virtual interactive engagement has the power to shift norms. Next slide. Included interventions used a mix of virtual, interactive, and in-person components, all of which brought audiences together and provided them with the opportunity to reflect and engage. Virtual interactive components included radio call-in shows, social media interactions, video stories, comic books, and personal diaries. In-person components were listening and viewing clubs, community outreach, and community dialogues. Next slide. When we look at the results of the included interventions, again focusing on the 31 that measured social norms, we see that interventions that included both in-person and virtual interactive components were the most successful. For example, when we compare the size of the blue bars or the count of the interventions that positively shifted norms by domain and the type of interactive component, we see that it is the same size or larger than the yellow portion of the bar for the interventions that use both types of components when compared to virtual or in-person interactive components alone, especially for the sexual and reproductive health, gender-based violence, and child and early forced marriage domains. In other words, social norm shifting interventions with entertainment media components are more effective when they create space for both types of approaches to build on each other, with the virtual components introducing new ideas and the in-person components creating space for reflection. Next slide. And so now, to bring us into the next part of the webinar, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Aissatou Ba. Aissatou is a senior program officer at the Gates Foundation. Based out of Nigeria, she anchors the Adolescent and Youth Learning Agenda team's grant making and strategy in Africa. She has over 15 years of experience working on girls' and young people's rights, programs, and movements. She exists to support platform and resource young Africans and their stories as a path to bring about a more just and equitable world. And thank you so much for being our moderator today. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Aissatou.
Thank you so much, Beth. I really appreciate being here. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone where you are. I think we'll just kind of jump into this one, right? The key finding here going into this session, this exemplar, change starts at home. It's really just this idea that blending in-person and virtual interactive engagement has a huge power to shift norms. Next slides, please. I'll just quickly introduce you to our wonderful presenters, and then I'll hand it over to them to give their presentation before we move into a brief Q&A. Next slide. I think I have Benita on the next slides. All right, I'll do it from here. Okay, all right. Sorry, I thought I had the slides with their bios. So starting off with Benita. Benita is a practitioner who's been doing this for over 20 years. By this, I mean social and behavior change work, working on social norms across Asia and the Middle East. She's led the design and delivery of several award-winning interventions in Nepal, including this one, The Change Starts at Home, in a flagship program, What Works, Phase 1. Over the past decade, she's focused deeply on violence prevention, particularly intimate partner violence. And then Carrie Jo, just give me a second because I have their bios. I thought I was going to be able to see it here.
Oh, no, we Benita's the
No
main
problem.
speaker.
It's fine.
So,
It's fine. It's fine.
Carrie
It's okay. I'm
just
okay.
Pardon
me?
I said Benita's the one with the main bio because she's going to do the main presentation. Carrie and I are just support acts.
Then I'll introduce you and Carrie if that's okay. Just briefly. Okay. So, and then also supporting is Carrie, who comes from an academic background. Her research is focused mainly on global health, the measurement and epidemiology of intimate partner violence. And she's the lead scientist at Change Starts at Home. And Gemma Ferguson, who's a principal consultant at Social Development Direct, who also has over 20 years professional experience working at the intersection of media, SBCC, and international development. I'll hand it over to the team now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all those introductions. So just to quickly get started on Change Starts at Home, this is a program from Nepal, and it's a multi-component social and behavior change intervention, and it is designed to prevent IPV among married couples, right? So we first launched this program in 2015, and since then, we have implemented 3 phases of this program, right? And each phase was rigorously evaluated through multiple studies. So for the first phase, we had a cluster RCT, and then for a diffusion part, we had a pilot test, and more recently for in 2023-24 for our last phase, we had a quasi experimental study. So to tell you about the intervention, it combines 3 core components. Uh, First one is the mass media, which is included mainly as a radio program, but we also had used some social media platforms. Uh, the other component was a curriculum-based group session, which was done with the couples guided by trained facilitators, right? And we also had a component on family and community engagement, which was to intentionally spread new norms through organized diffusion. So at the heart of the change program is our approach to behavior change, and we call it a big change approach. So overall, it's a 9 months long journey with 3 intervention phases, right? So the B for big change, which is our first phase of the intervention, is called beliefs and attitudes, where couples are encouraged to reflect on their own personal values and norms and beliefs. And then the second phase, I, is the intention to change. So once they have done their reflection, then in this second phase, they learn and practice their relationship skills and life skills. And for the last phase, the go phase, where participants take their learnings into their families and to the wider communities, helping to shift broader norms around them, right? And the radio program and the social media, it runs across all these 3 phases as a cross-cutting component. And in terms of the program impact, as you can see on the right of the slide here, uh, and this is from our last phase, right? So we saw significant reductions in all forms of violence. So around 27% reduction among female participants and 21% among the community members. And what was important for us was that these reductions were not just observed at the end line only, but it was sustained 6 months later. In terms on norms change, we saw clear improvements in descriptive norms, and these shifts were also held at the follow-up for both participants who were directly involved and also for the broader community members compared with our control groups, right? Improvements in injunctive norms, it was sustained only among the intervention participants. And in terms of the magnitude, we noted that the effects were consistently larger among our intervention participants, and this was expected given their direct exposure and deeper engagement, right? And finally, we also saw increases in anti-violence advocacy, including self-initiated actions from our community groups and our multi-stakeholder partners. So this was a very brief summary for the change intervention. And for the next part, I think I'll hand it over to you so we can view that short video clip from the program. So just to tell you, this video gives a very quick sense of how different components, especially the radio drama and the group sessions, came together in practice, right? So I think we'll play just a minute or two, but it really brings the program to life. Yeah, so let's take a look.
We also use the radio program to highlight examples of couple where men and women shared equal relationship where one did not exert power over the other. The weekly group meetings gave members a safe space to listen, question, reflect, and discuss about different norms and beliefs that existed in our society, from gender roles to financial decision making to the idea that sex was a man's right.
त्यति बेला सुरुको चलाउँदाखेरि त खासै त्यस्तो भित्री कुराहरू थिएन अनि जब सुरुमा अब दोस्रो तेस्रोमा त्यो के अरे तारा त्यसपछि पदमको कुरा आउँदै गए उनीहरूले एकदम इन्ट्रेस्ट गरेर सुन्नलाई भन्नाले तारा र पदमको कहानी जस्तो अब श्रीमतीले चाहिँ नि दुःख गर्ने घाँस काट्ने दुध ल्याएर दोकानमा बेच्ने त्यसपछि त्यो पैसा आउने बेला भयो भने पुरुषले लिने भन्दाखेरि कस्तो रहेछ है त्यस्तै छ हाम्रो गाउँ फलानालाई पनि त्यस्तै छ है भन्ने कुरा गर्ने अनि त्यसरी बिस्तारै बिस्तारै त्यो एपिसोडहरू सुन्दै जानुभयो त्यसपछि उहाँहरू चाहिँ नि आफैले पनि कुरा निकाल्नु मैले भन्दा बढी उहाँहरू बोल्न थाल्नु भएपछि
Okay, so as you saw in the clip, the radio program played a really important role during the group sessions. It really helped our couples engage with sensitive topics more comfortably, right? And also it gave our facilitators an easy way to speak, to facilitate, like spark deeper conversations about relationship, communication, or about norms, right? So and also, like, it created a shared storyline for our couples so they could relate to it and reflect on together. With that, I am handing it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. This was fantastic. And I think you just gave us a really nice segue into what is the first question. You've spoken really incisively about how sort of interacting, how the virtual part of your program and in-person interacted at the implementation level. I was wondering if you can speak to us a little bit more about how those two components really complemented each other to shift norms.
I think for this part, I would invite my colleague Gemma to respond to this.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for the question. And really, I mean, Benita touched on it in what she just said in terms of what the radio program really provided was an opportunity for the couples in the group to talk about the radio program before they were ready to talk about themselves and their own lives. As well as that, it also really allowed us, you talk about kind of role modeling as being a key component in shifting and changing norms of behaviors. But what we were able to do with the radio program is to really sort of model what those discussions and dialogues needed to be. For example, around consent, we had a whole storyline that was around sort of consent and talking about sex between couples, and that's a really difficult thing to sort of explain to somebody how you do that, or to have someone role model it in the community. So being able to show that within the radio program really allowed us to sort of give people not only role models to aspire to, but also the language to use in different situations when they were kind of practicing these new norms and behaviors. I think other than that, also the use of, so we did have some social media components, and that did allow us to also interact it to a lesser extent, but to some extent with the wider community and also the wider society within Nepal to really start having these conversations. Because I think what we also found in terms of norms change, what often happens in norms change programs is that they change within this very tight group where it's safe. But then as soon as those people move out into the wider community and start practicing these new behaviors, these new norms, nobody else has shifted. And so they're forced to sort of retract. So being able to sort of broadcast the radio program out to the wider community as well enabled some change to happen, and socializing the wider community on these norms, which then impacted our ability to for our couples to kind of maintain and to use that, as you can see with the diffusion element, to really push that norm change beyond the small group out to the wider community.
Thank you, Gemma. Your audio was a little bit shaky, so in case you're coming on again, it might be a headpiece issue. The next question we have for the three of you is just around, and you've touched on this already, Gemma, a little bit, about the specific challenges that emerged using the combined approach. And if you were to do this again, if you were to take the same approach of combining in-person and virtual?
Yeah, so I'm going to pick up on this one. Thank you for that lead in. We can tell from the groups and from the results that this combines in-person and media is critical. So the interpersonal engagement, the dialogue in the groups, in the couples, in the families, in the communities. So no media by itself, no interpersonal interaction by itself, but trying to develop all of these streams simultaneously at the very beginning so that they interacted and they were synergistic with one another and spoke to one another was a tremendous challenge at the very, very beginning. It's still a little bit difficult now when we think about also the social media and whatnot. So what would we do differently? So promotion, the radio was so important, particularly in the groups, but it needs much more promotion outward. The media channels are very, very full of content, so trying to get people's attention is critical to outside the group having that synergistic impact. The other thing that we would do differently next time is the social media piece, which is one of the channels that we use for interaction. You mentioned the sort of audio call-in shows. The social media really needs a full, line all of its own to really be developed strongly so that it can do more in terms of sort of being a form of interaction and stimulating discussion and critical reflection that I think is really important. That would also put us in a good place to move also into schools. So there was a lot of interest in trying to adapt this curriculum and this approach for the school systems in terms of those locally grown anti-advocacy groups that grew up out of this process spontaneously. So working in schools with adolescents would be a critical sort of next step, and the social media angle is going to be particularly important in engaging with that socio-demographic. Thank you.
Thank you, team. Thank you, Benita, Jama, and Carrie Jo. I think, Princess, I see you have your hand up. Well, I'll move just in case you can come off mute if you had something to say, Princess, but otherwise, this has been an excellent presentation. I've really appreciated your reflections on what your approach might be going forward, your very intelligent reflections based on what you've learned. And I think indeed some of what you've seen is similar to what we're seeing just around congestion, what you need to do to maintain attention, and just how you need to tailor media to the specific audience, not just the content, right, but the channels, so you reach the right people. I think over to the next presenter.
Yeah, thank you, Isa2. So now on to the second finding that we want to highlight, which is that making norms visible and promoting critical reflection creates conditions for norms to change. Next slide. Reviews of what norm-shifting interventions have in common have yielded a set of features that are generally accepted as the hallmark of a norm-shifting approach. And you can see them here on this slide. As part of our review, we explored whether the included interventions incorporated these normative mechanisms of change. So, for example, whether they were based on accurate identification of norms, reference groups, and sanctions, whether they sought community level rather than individual level change, which often meant that they would include elements of plan diffusion, and then also whether they engage reference group members. Next slide. Again, focusing on the 31 interventions that measured social norms, when we compare the size of the blue bars to the yellow, we see that interventions were most likely to result in positive shifts in social norms if they made norms visible catalyzed reflection, diffused new ideas, and capitalized on community rather than individual level change, demonstrating the power of these mechanisms to bring about positive change in social and norm shifting interventions that include entertainment media components. And so, Isa 2, I'm going to pass it on to you to introduce our next exemplar.
Apologies, I had to come off mute. I was saying absolutely, it's an honor to introduce this one, not only because we do work directly with them, but also because of the position Shujaz occupies in the zeitgeist in Kenya. Leading into the key finding here, just around making norms visible through the critical reflection, critical reflection creates enabling environments to shift norms in media. Next slide. I'll introduce Bridget quickly, and then I'll hand it over to her. So Bridget Deacon is the managing director of Shoe Jazz Inc., an Emmy award-winning network of social ventures. She's based in Kenya. She's a passionate believer of storytelling to drive change and shoe jazz. And she's worked and led sort of media and behavior change campaigns, reaching over 7.5 million young people across East Africa. Before moving to Kenya, she worked at BBC in London, developing acclaimed youth television drama. Welcome, Bridget. Over to you.
Thank you, Isa. Apologies that you had to read out that rather long bio. So if my sound glitches, please do let me know and I can turn my video off as I'm currently tethering. For those of you who don't know, the word shujaz comes from the Swahili word meaning heroes. And essentially that's what we do. We're telling the stories of everyday heroes, some real, some fictional, but all reflecting the lived realities of and the social norms that shape the lives of young people in East Africa. As I just said, we reach millions of young people focusing on that 15 to 24-year-old group through TV, comic books, digital dramas, social media, and through community-based youth-led clubs and events, all of which is designed to open up conversations amongst young people that really matter to them. And of course, this is why we're here, but these stories aren't just designed to entertain, but also to influence behaviours and to shift some of those normative expectations that young people have about themselves and each other. So through various evaluations over the years, we've seen that engaging with Shujaz media does have a significant impact on behaviours and attitudes and perceptions. Tulane University did a study where we saw that digital audiences were 43% more likely to use condoms than non-fans, and that urban girls on our network were 2.4 times more likely to delay childbirth. So I'd just like to tell you a little bit about the intervention that we're highlighting today, which I happen to be working with Isa 2 on. It's been running throughout this year and is currently being evaluated by Mathematica. But I just want to tell you a little bit about how we've designed it and the impact that it's having on how we're making some of these invisible norms more visible. So all of the media that we produce is informed by research. And last year we were exploring gender norms in Kenya to inform a program that we're delivering in collaboration with MTV Staying Alive Foundation. And it's designed to really tackle the restrictive and harmful norms that perpetuate gender inequality in Kenya. And this ground truth research revealed a critical but often overlooked risk around how boys and young men are feeling excluded and misunderstood, particularly as a result of gender equity conversations and interventions, and at the same time are feeling immense pressure to provide in what right now in Kenya is quite a harsh economy. And that combination of exclusion and pressure was driving shame, withdrawal, gambling, substance abuse, toxic online backlash, and ultimately harmful attitudes that behave towards and behaviours towards girls. So we created this multimedia campaign to safely surface some of these norms and with a view to sort of reduce the backlash and to support more equitable, healthy relationships between boys and girls. One of the many outcomes that we're measuring that's on this slide is to indicate the impact of this media on an increase in the number of boys and young men who are rejecting norms and that endorse the norms, sorry, that endorse male authority in sexual reproductive health and household decision making. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about this intervention. So if we could go to the next slide, to both surface and shift these harmful norms safely and at scale, we built a fictional storyline that mirrored the real pressures that boys told us in the research, and these pressures that they're living with. And so we used one of Shujata's most loved and trusted characters, DJB, the one with the cool hair, to model boys' experiences, to surface hidden norms, and to open up space for really honest and authentic conversations. And the objectives with the fictional arc were to mirror boys' lived realities and the pressures, to trigger these conversations both online and offline and on our WhatsApp chatbot, to make these invisible norms visible, particularly around that if I can't provide, I'm failing, or I can't show emotions, and also to show healthier and more hopeful alternatives. And so the story covered over the course of a year, DJB facing many of the pressures that we heard young boys sharing. His mother's sick, he can't pay the hospital bills. He's under pressure to pay for his sister's school fees. He's got romantic pressure to provide for a girlfriend he really likes. And he turns to gambling as a coping mechanism. And so we told DJB's story through a unified multimedia campaign on national TV as animations, in millions of comic books, on social media, including DJB's own Facebook page that he manages that has over 1 million followers, and in-person events and small meetups. If we go to the next slide, alongside these fictional stories, we also surface the real stories of young men who are navigating the same pressures, and many of whom have found ways to do it in healthy and relatable ways. And so these real life young men become the positive deviants or the trusted messengers that are showing alternative paths that are possible, in still reflecting, they live in the same context, the same challenges they experience as the audience. And so these stories are shared in the same way as the fictional ones: TV, social media, in comic books, and at events. And this two-part strategy, the fictional arc married with the real stories, is designed to sort of help the audience recognize their own struggles, talk about them, and begin to imagine a different future for themselves. And ultimately, start to normalize healthier behaviors and shift some of those perceived norms. Thank you, Asatu.
Thank you. We've throughout from the finding to now, and I'm going off script a little bit here, speak about visibility, all right? Making norms visible. I was just wondering if you could just take 30 seconds to sort of speak about the importance of that and like what step that is, between the making of the content, what really making visible means, and sort of what that feeds into in shifting norms.
Yeah, well, I think, so much of the what could be described as toxic or unhealthy or harmful behaviors are really driven by shame, and shame lives in the dark. And I think a lot of these invisible but deeply rooted norms are really hard to kind of unpack and unpick. And so really first, we've got to surface what's normally invisible. We've got to create these spaces where young people feel safe enough to really kind of speak openly and without judgment. And we know that when young people feel safe, those underlying expectations that shape those behaviors quickly rise to the surface, like these boys' belief that actually I'm never going to get a girlfriend if I can't financially provide. And then we can start to make them visible. And I think fiction is such a powerful tool to do that, because we've got sort of control. The characters can mirror these pressures in authentic and different ways, showing how norms work in real life, how peers react to them, how norm holders react, and how pressure can build and what the consequences look like. But it's safe because it's fictional. And then when you pair that with real stories that show credible alternatives and you start to challenge that assumption of sort of, oh, I thought everyone thought like that, or I thought everyone expected me to behave like that. And then when we start to create those spaces for discussion, and what we see is that our audience are so much more willing and feel more safe to discuss fictional stories, because you're not sort of judging a real person. You can start to see what people really believe, and show where those norms are being reinforced, where they're being questioned, or where they start to shift. And then those norms stop becoming invisible, there's less shame, and then they sort of, becomes discussable and change is possible. That wasn't 30 seconds, Isa. I'm really sorry.
No, but it was absolutely excellent because I did think taking the privilege of the mic, I think it's important what you just shared with us. Before, if we have time, I'll come back to, I'm really interested in what you think about what's enabling about a multimedia approach in making norms, attitudes, and behaviors more visible versus some sort of singular line media approach. But quickly, if you can just talk to us about some of what was most challenging in designing and implementing this intervention and how you're thinking about adapting going forward.
Yeah, I think, well, I had a chat with this about the team. I think we all agreed that the biggest challenge wasn't so much in the production or the distribution of the media, it was what the content unlocked, particularly online. And as soon as boys saw their own pressures reflected back to them through animations, through illustrations, through content, we saw some very strong reactions, which were hard to navigate. On the one side, there was real backlash with quite sort of toxic conversations happening, comments like girls are out to destroy us, us boys just need to stand alone. And it was quite a defensive pushback. But I suppose that is what you might expect to happen when those deeply rooted norms start to feel threatened. But on the other side, we saw deep vulnerability from the boys, disclosing shame, addiction, fear about money, fear about rejection, and quite a few around suicidal thoughts. And so this was a real challenge to know how best to respond. And I think we had to adapt very quickly. And so we quickly put more support around our social media team, the young people who manage those conversations, ensuring that they were able to keep those engagements non-judgmental, so that the boys didn't shut down, but also to be able to gently probe and introduce new voices that could offer alternative views. And we built relationships with sort of professional referral partners who could offer counselling to those who were really struggling. But I think we tried to treat the backlash and these responses not as failure, but more as a signal of where norms were tightening or loosening. And so while it was a challenge, it did show us how important it is that we're creating spaces for these boys to have these conversations where they feel genuinely seen and allowing things to come to the surface, that shame, the pain, the pressure. And then really that's when we can start to see change happen.
Thank you. It appears we do have a little bit of time. So before moving on, I just want to come quickly back to this idea around what's you talked a bit about the media components from your intervention and the nature of it. So I was just wondering if you could speak to how you think the multimedia approach brings about more visibility than less using other approaches.
Yeah, I think so. The name, for those who don't know, the name of the program that Shujaz Inc. and MTV Staying Alive Foundation are working on with Isato is called Surround Sound Kenya. And the reason we call it Surround Sound is on the power of a multiple media intervention where messages that sort of surface different attitudes, different behaviors and norms are able to reach people from multiple different channels, sorry. And when you see those, when you're receiving these stories from different trusted messengers from different trusted platforms and you're sort of surrounded by them, they start to feel normalized. You start to you're in an echo chamber where the stories are being amplified and reinforced from different touch points. So I think, when we have just one channel, it can be effective as long as people are really paying attention. And I think what was mentioned earlier about the noise of social media, the saturation of content and voices is so overwhelming. So if we can really try and flood within those media ecosystems the same narratives that are reinforcing positive behaviors and attitudes and norms, we have a chance to start to make a difference.
Thank you so much, Bridget. We are almost at time, and I'm really glad that you made that connection with the previous speaker, because indeed, as they were speaking about some of their challenges, I was thinking about the surround sound approach and how the weaknesses, right, or the risk in the ecosystem can be actually turned into strengths, depending on how you design things or collaborations that you sort of enable in the sector for people to be saying the same things at the same time.
Exactly.
I think we'll move on to our final presenter. This will be just a quick reminder to everyone that the presentation will happen in French, I believe. So please make sure you are in the correct channel. Beth, I believe this is true. If it's untrue, please
Yeah,
correct me.
yeah, thank you, Isasu. Yeah, so I'll continue to present in English, and
Okay.
then we'll move on to the next portion, which will be in French. So, like Isasu said, if we could all just take a minute right now, and go into the interpretation selection on your webinar, and make sure that if you speak French, to remain in the French channel. But then also, if you don't speak French, please make sure that you are in the English channel so that you're able to hear the translation of the presentation. And you'll still be able to hear me in English, of course. So now I want to discuss the final finding, which we want to highlight, which is that locally grounded and short duration interventions can shift norms, which was actually what we found to be one of our most surprising results. So next slide. So one last time, we're going to look at those 31 interventions that measured social norms. And here we see that across domains, for each of the durations that we investigated, which included either less than 1 year, 1 to 2 years, or at least 3 years, the size of the blue bars, or those that created positive shifts in norms, was the same as the size of the yellow bars. In other words, across domains, interventions lasting less than 1 year were just as effective at shifting norms as longer duration programs. Of course, in order to achieve this, interventions need to have a strong understanding of local context by grounding their content within the communities. And so ISA2 is going to introduce our final exemplar, which is one of these interventions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Beth. So finally, we're landing on Confiance Totale and the exemplar intervention here. And it's really will be rooted in the third key finding, as Beth has outlined, just talking about how locally grounded short duration interventions can shift norms. And how this is just really important in the ecosystem. Not every program can be long. Sometimes you need to respond immediately to situations on the ground. And so how do you do that? We're really curious. Next slide, please. Monsieur Hilaire Tokplot will be telling us a little bit more about how you do that. Hilaire is a global health professional with nearly 25 years experience leading and supporting international development initiatives across a range of focus areas. His work includes program design, implementation, and he's worked in sectors such as maternal and child health, nutrition, humanitarian response. Hilaire is really passionate, and he's worked across multiple Central and West Africa countries. Welcome, Hilaire. Thanks for joining us. Je parle français, but I decided to spare you my Anglo-Français for the purposes of this. Over.
Merci beaucoup, Aïssatou. Donc, tout l'honneur pour moi de vous parler rapidement de la campagne Confiance Totale au Togo. Une campagne qui a été mise en œuvre, développée par le Centre Johns Hopkins des programmes de communication de Baltimore dans 4 pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, dont le Togo. Il faut rappeler que cette campagne avait plusieurs interventions, dont le volet radio, et c'est du volet radio, les interventions, les résultats par rapport au volet radio que je vais vous parler, je vais vous présenter rapidement. Alors, la campagne a été développée entre 2020 et 2021, donc en pleine crise de COVID-19, et ça avait pour objectif de promouvoir l'efficacité et la confiance des clients dans l'utilisation des méthodes de planification familiale. Comme on l'a dit, il y a eu deux phases de cette campagne. La première phase de mai à septembre 2020 et la deuxième phase de juillet à décembre 2021. Slide. Donc, nous avons produit 10 différents spots radio, sur différentes thématiques et nous avions travaillé avec une agence de communication pour nous aider à coordonner cette campagne. Nous avons, pour le cas du Togo, la campagne a été diffusée sur 7 radios de proximité, radios communautaires, les radios les plus écoutées au niveau du Togo. Et nous avions mis en place une méthodologie appelée méthodologie de saturation plus, qui consistait à diffuser 15 spots par jour entre 6 heures du matin et 10 heures du soir. Et ces spots étaient diffusés autour des émissions de grande écoute, donc les émissions qui étaient affectionnées par les auditeurs. Il faut rappeler aussi ajouter que la campagne a été diffusée en français, mais également dans 2 langues locales les plus écoutées. J'ai déjà parlé des 2 langues. Donc, nous avons sollicité aussi des personnes volontaires qui nous ont aidés à faire le suivi de la diffusion sur les radios qui ont été sélectionnées afin de nous aider à suivre l'efficacité, suivre l'effectivité de la diffusion de ces spots-là aux heures indiquées. Parce que je dois souligner que quand un spot n'est pas diffusé dans le créneau horaire planifié, donc le créneau horaire de grande écoute, ce spot est considéré comme non avenu et doit être rediffusé, reprogrammé et rediffusé. Donc, c'était un peu la stratégie que nous avons mis en place. Slide. Merci beaucoup. Comme on peut le constater, la campagne a été évaluée et nous avions fait cette évaluation dans 2 régions, comme je vous le disais, afin de mesurer l'exposition à cette campagne, mais également quelques effets liés aux normes sociales. En termes de nombre de personnes qui ont été enquêtées dans les 2 régions, nous avions enquêté 2200 personnes réparties équitablement entre les 2 sexes, mais également réparties équitablement entre les 2 régions. Et comme vous pouvez le constater, la campagne a démontré qu'il y a eu une forte exposition au message diffusé lors de cette campagne, une exposition qui a dépassé 45%. Slide. À la fin de la campagne, nous avons procédé à une évaluation afin d'apprécier les associations de certains paramètres de normes sociales, de normes, notamment les normes qui sont en lien avec l'utilisation des méthodes de planification familiale. Mais de façon générale, vous pouvez constater que les personnes qui ont été exposées à cette campagne ont été beaucoup plus à même d'utiliser ou ont été plus ouverts à l'utilisation des méthodes de PF. Mais de façon plus spécifique, comme vous pouvez le constater au niveau des graphiques, nous avons par exemple, cette campagne a montré une influence positive des normes autour de la planification familiale, notamment les personnes qui ont été fortement exposées sont plus à même d'utiliser les méthodes de PF, mais aussi nous avons pu constater que certains spots diffusés ont encouragé les discussions ouvertes entre la femme et l'homme autour de la décision par rapport à qui décide de quand et détermine le nombre d'enfants et autres. Nous avons par exemple mis en exergue que cette discussion soit engagée par la femme au sein du ménage, parce que ce que nous constatons souvent, c'est l'homme qui prend ses décisions au niveau des PF. Donc, certains des spots que nous avons diffusés ont aidé à mettre en exergue que cette discussion soit initiée par la femme. Et donc, comme vous pouvez le constater, la barre qui parle des normes sociales est, comme beaucoup d'autres barres, au-delà du point 1, qui est l'élément qui montre l'indicateur des effets concrets et réels en lien avec cette campagne cette campagne radio par rapport à l'utilisation et à la disponibilité des méthodes de PF. Autres normes que nous avons vues aussi qui ont été positivement influencées, c'est les normes liées à la négociation par rapport à qui doit prendre la décision d'utiliser les méthodes de PF au sein du ménage. Et la troisième norme que nous avons pu mesurer, c'est les normes qui sont liées au, 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 au système d'utilisation des méthodes, notamment les relations entre les systèmes de santé et les clients par rapport à l'utilisation des méthodes de PF. Tout à l'heure, le spot que vous allez écouter, c'est un spot euh, qui met en exergue un agent de santé qui encourage le couple, notamment l'homme, il lui donne des informations sur les méthodes de PF et comment ces méthodes peuvent être utilisées pour pouvoir limiter ou planifier les naissances au sein des ménages. Donc, voilà de façon résumée ce que je pourrais dire par rapport aux interventions de cette campagne et notamment à la diffusion des spots radio sur cette campagne. Merci.
Merci, merci, Hilaire.
Voilà la nouvelle maman. Monsieur, votre femme et votre bébé se portent bien.
Merci beaucoup, madame. Je prendrai bien soin d'eux.
Ici, dans notre centre, nous proposons à toutes les femmes qui accouchent une méthode de planification familiale pour les aider à espacer la prochaine naissance. C'est une excellente manière de protéger la santé du nouveau-né et celle de la mère.
Ah oui? Veuillez nous expliquer alors comment faire. Je voudrais bien que ma femme se repose avant de faire d'autres bébés, mais les gens parlent des effets secondaires des méthodes de planification familiale.
Vous pouvez avoir confiance totale qu'une méthode de planification familiale est avantageuse pour vous et votre famille, sans danger pour votre femme. Et il ne présente aucun danger ni pour le nouveau-né, ni pour la maman qui allaite. En cas d'effet secondaire, les agents de santé sont disponibles pour vous aider à les gérer. Au besoin, vous pourriez même changer pour une autre méthode. Je suis à votre écoute pour le suivi de l'utilisation de la méthode que vous aurez choisie.
Ah! Merci madame pour ces explications et pour votre gentillesse. Cela nous réconforte pour l'utilisation d'une méthode. Il existe plusieurs méthodes de planification familiale parmi lesquelles vous pouvez choisir. Ayez confiance totale en votre méthode de planification familiale. Rendez-vous dans le centre de santé le plus proche pour avoir la méthode de planification familiale de votre choix. Ceci est un message du ministère de la Santé et de l'Hygiène publique.
Hilaire, any reflections on the video?
Oui. Pardon?
Any comments? Do you have any comments to make on the video before we jump into our conversation?
Donc, c'est exactement comme je le disais tout à l'heure. On a produit une dizaine de spots et ces différents spots mettaient en exergue différents messages par rapport à l'utilisation des services de planification familiale. Par exemple, comme je l'ai dit, cette campagne a été mise en exergue, a été développée pendant la période de Covid, un moment où les gens étaient à la maison et étaient confinés à la maison. Donc, c'était une opportunité pour les couples, mais également pour les jeunes, de prendre des dispositions afin d'éviter d'avoir des grossesses non planifiées. Il y avait des spots, par exemple, comme je l'ai dit, qui encourageait le dialogue, la discussion entre l'homme et la femme par rapport à la décision même d'adopter une méthode de PF ou pas. Il y avait aussi des spots qui parlaient de la disponibilité des services parce que quand bien même on était en période de confinement, les services étaient restés disponibles au niveau des formations sanitaires, mais pour les couples qui savaient déjà quelle méthode de PF ils utilisaient, ils pouvaient se rendre, ils pouvaient s'en procurer en pharmacie pour les utiliser. Il y avait aussi des spots qui adressaient les jeunes par rapport à la nécessité pour eux de prendre des dispositions pour éviter donc. D'autres spots aussi parlaient, comme je le disais, des rapports qu'il pouvait y avoir entre les agents de santé et les formations sanitaires sur la disponibilité des agents même à pouvoir écouter, recevoir et écouter les clients potentiels, les utilisateurs, et les conseiller, les accompagner dans l'utilisation de leur méthode. Vous vous souvenez, cette période était une période de panique générale par rapport même au fait de pouvoir se rendre dans les formations sanitaires parce que voilà, c'était une grande psychose. On se demandait si c'était pas plutôt là-bas que on avait plus de risques de s'infecter de Covid. Donc voilà, mais ce sur quoi je tenais surtout à mettre l'accent, c'est ces aspects de normes sociales qui ont été mis en éveil à travers différents spots, notamment les normes en matière de pouvoir, qui décident de quand, du nombre d'enfants, les normes aussi en matière de qui a droit à la parole au sein du ménage sur des questions aussi sensibles et spécifiques en matière d'utilisation des méthodes de PF, mais également les normes en matière des normes systémiques qui disent comment les agents de santé communiquent avec les patients ou encouragent les clients à se sentir à l'aise de demander et d'utiliser les méthodes de leur choix. Donc voilà ce que je pourrais ajouter avant de vous laisser la parole. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Hilaire. So you were able to achieve such great outcomes in a year. A question we did have was if you felt there were any opportunities that you might have missed because this was such a short implementation time frame, or do you think that's what made it such a successful program in terms of norm shift? Hello?
Hello.
Hello, Hilaire, it's over to you. I was going directly to question two around what opportunities you think you might have missed with the short implementation time frame. Yeah.
Oui, je pense que les éléments qui ont permis d'avoir cet effet en matière des normes qui ont été influencées, quand bien même la campagne a été de courte durée, je peux dire qu'il y a eu l'approche de saturation. L'approche de saturation qui consistait sur les périodes où on est censé être en éveil, donc entre 6 heures du matin et 10 heures du soir, de diffuser de façon intensive ces spots 15 fois dans la journée. Il y a aussi le fait que nous avons travaillé avec les radios communautaires et sur des créneaux, sur des programmes qui étaient les plus écoutés. Ces spots étaient placés soit à l'intérieur, soit un peu avant ou un peu après ces spots, pardon, ces programmes de grande écoute. Et le fait aussi d'avoir travaillé, d'avoir traduit ces spots-là dans certaines langues locales ont permis de pouvoir toucher un grand nombre de personnes. Et je pense aussi que ces spots ou cette campagne radio qui a été menée, je dois peut-être même souligner que ce n'était pas a priori orienté dans ce sens. Nous avons saisi l'opportunité de Covid-19 où les gens étaient à la maison, étaient confinés à la maison pour développer d'autres messages et pouvoir capter l'attention de ces personnes. Je crois que c'est autant de choses, autant de paramètres qui ont permis à cette campagne de pouvoir atteindre ses objectifs dans une période, dans un laps de temps. Donc voilà ce que je peux dire. Peut-être aussi, je dois souligner qu'il y avait aussi le fait d'avoir créé un jingle. Il y avait un jingle qui annonçait peu importe la thématique et peu importe la langue de diffusion. Donc, c'était un peu comme un effet que tu zappes d'une radio à l'autre. Tu avais une grande... comment on dit? Le fait de pouvoir capter ce programme était avec ce jingle qui passait en boucle sur l'ensemble des radios qui étaient impliquées dans la campagne. Donc, c'est autant de paramètres qui ont permis certainement d'avoir les effets de cette campagne-là, les résultats que nous avons pu observer.
Thank you so much, Hilaire. Unfortunately, we are out of time. So if you are able, Hilaire, to just pop in the chat any thoughts that you have around what you would do differently. I think people will be curious going forward, right? If you were to do the same intervention today, would you change anything? And what it is, the thing that you would change? If you please pop it in the chat. I think people want to know. I certainly would like to know, but I think I'll move us on to the next reflection part.
Thank you.
It is time for our Q&A. All right. Just 1 second.
Great. Thank you, everyone. So yeah, now we just have a few minutes. I know that there have been Q&A in the chat, but if there's anything else, we just have the time probably for one question. So if people want to come off of mute, yeah, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, I do see one open question that's kind of addressed to everyone. And so if there's anyone who might want to respond to this, we see the question is, what strategies are organizations using or planning to use to both target audiences and maximize the virality of their media content? So I don't know if there's somebody who kind of has one of our presenters who has a quick response to this question.
Beth, can you share the question again?
Yeah, here. I'll post it. I'll put it in the chat for everyone to see.
I can give it a go, Beth. Hi, this is Bridget from Shujaz. So I think essentially, you know, if we knew what the silver bullet or the recipe for virility was, we would be all be doing it. But I think emotional resonance is something that's absolutely key that we see when our content kind of goes viral or pieces of our content go viral. And it's not just emotional resonance, but I think it's around what we would describe those sort of moments of truth. So one of our stories or pieces of content that has gone viral recently was just one of our digital dramas where a girl discovers that she's had her period and it's showing on her skirt. And just because it's that moment which so many people could identify with, it's sort of connected with something that so many people, kind of like feel the shame, feel the embarrassment, feel the empathy, know how that feels, but also tapped into a larger kind of conversation that was happening in Kenya that had been led by a similar situation with an MP. So I think really for us, it's about, are we really listening to what's going on in the wider context? And are we kind of really getting down to that sort of moment of truth that a large amount of your target audience can kind of nod and go, oh yeah, that's happened to me. I know how that feels. But Sarah, I'm not sure if that answers your question, and I'm sure some of the other panelists have got some answers as well.
I'm happy to, if my sound is okay. Does my sound better?
Yeah, great. Just really quickly, because we have a little bit left that we want to get to. But yeah, please go ahead,
I
Jonah.
think just very quickly say that just in terms of the second part, we did pay for boosting, realizing that it was a small drop in the ocean compared to what others could pay for in terms of that. And I think the other thing we did was to include images and to also include audio of the drama with our posts as well, so that they were more engaging than just plain text posts.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And I see many more questions have come in the question answer. So we're going to move on to the final portion of this webinar. But please take a look at the questions in the question answer, and we'll be responding to everything also over with our after the webinar as well. So back to you, Aissatou, to introduce our closing reflections.
Thank you, Beth. Yes, to close us off, we have none other but Lungisile Kweyama. Lungisile is the country manager for South Africa of MTV Staying Alive Foundation. She's a passionate advocate for youth development and behavioral change communication. She holds a Master of Philosophy in HIV and AIDS Management from Stellenbosch, and she oversees all of Staying Alive's activities in South Africa, ensuring the effective implementation of media-driven youth-focused health interventions. Over to you, Lungisile.
I'm waiting for the clip to be played by the team, hence the silence. Sorry.
All right, I'll go on mute.
We all have a story to tell. They're about choices.
You're 16 for crying out loud.
They're about helping each other out. About learning from each other.
She doesn't know about my status. Tell her now.
About making mistakes.
Sorry, Mom, sorry!
You know how it is in the heat of the moment. I swear I stopped when she started screaming.
Throw them out!
Am I at risk?
What are you talking about?
HIV. And overcoming adversity.
I forbid you!
Dad, you forbid me. I'm not a child.
I love you, Nairobi! They're about turning it up and bringing it back down. They're about falling in love and falling out of love.
Are you trying to break up with me?
I just did.
They're about being different.
I said I'm gay. Did you even hear that part?
There's not a thing that I don't know about you.
About fighting for a better future.
Say no! No!
HIV and AIDS are not even the same thing.
Who wants to be having the sex?
Because these stories are real.
The first kiss was kind of nice. Just gave me a few butterflies.
I have to accept that I am pregnant and I can't change this.
These stories are important.
People, when they come out, they lose their families. Some even lose their lives.
It's time for me to be my own woman.
Youth have a future, and the information is spreading already like wildfire.
I like being a peer educator because I'm able to help other people and help myself.
I see myself as an independent woman, not dependent, independent.
It's not turning back right now.
These stories are powerful. These stories are our own. Our stories can change the world.
Thank you to the team for playing that, and it's one of our clips that always gives me goosebumps. My piece is quite small to contribute to this wonderful conversation that has been going on. I'd like to start by saying thanks to the three organizations that have been doing amazing work. Sit and reflect, and also just look to what can see that these interventions they do work, but how can we then improve them with everything that's happening globally? So when I looked at what the three organizations have been doing, what we have learned within MTV Sugar and within the series itself and everything else that we do around our flagship MTV Sugar. So when it comes to shifting norms, and not only just shifting norms, but actually identifying those harmful norms. So there are three things that we have learned amongst many, but for interest of time, I'll just mention three. So one of them is shifting norms is everyone's responsibility. So we know that adolescents and young people, they confront harmful norms in their own spaces. However, it becomes challenging for them to see real change because they still go back to their homes, they still go back to their schools, they still go back to their churches where we find these norm holders. Hence, it's everyone's responsibility. And I love what the first speakers from it begins at home, how everyone was involved. It was not only just about youth, but it was also around people that are in relationships, married people. So it's everyone's responsibility. And secondly, let us include norm holders from the beginning of planning our interventions. Because one thing that we have also realized, more particularly here in South Africa, is that parents and caregivers, they sometimes feel as if our interventions are there to suppress them, to suppress their voices when it comes to their young people. So if they are included in the beginning of planning interventions, they will see that this is a collaborative effort. So everyone is trying their best to change the things that we thought are working, but they're actually not working. So they become part of the conversation. And thirdly, reaching young people where they are. And you'll hear me referring to this quite a lot because I think it's really important. And the power of storytelling has showed us that we are able to reach young people where they are because we engage them on issues that ultimately change the trajectory of their lives. So when we use multimedia, for instance, we reach them where they are. We know why young people are on social media. They're not necessarily watching TV sometimes. They're not listening on radio, but we know where we can find them. They are in sports clubs. They attend different youth groups. So let's go to where they are. And second to this, when we really zoom into what we have done, but not only these three organizations, but what has been done in the social behavioral space, communication over the years, how do we then scale up? And looking at our work, especially, how do we scale up? How do we strengthen our engagement? How do we tell stories that young people still resonate with? When I reflected on this, we know that adolescents and youth, they access sexual reproductive health information mostly on social media, especially in this era that we lived in. And this is followed by certain websites that they trust and other applications. So mass media essentially is at the bottom of that list. So the question for us who are operating in this space is how do we then leverage social media to drive young people to the different platforms that we are using to distribute our work? So as SEV, how do we leverage social media to make sure that young people still go on SABC1, they still go on BET, they still go on MTV, they still go on YouTube to actually watch and engage with our content? And mass media is powerful because it cuts across generations. When I was listening to to the team that used radio, to distribute their information. I remember when I was young, there was a radio station, it still exists, where they'll play stories, and we'll sit and listen to those stories with my parents. And those stories had absolutely nothing to do with us, but we'll sit and still listen. So it actually shows the power of how multimedia it reaches across generations, and it also brings forth the opportunity for collaboration. And again, we no longer form content such as our mini-series, and there are other different partners that have done mini-series. But of course, for this conversation, I will use the MTV Sugar series, in the different settings in Nigeria, in Kenya, in South Africa, in India, that it has very compelling storylines. It taps into emotions, and it impacts the audience in such a way that they look in their behavior. And I love what Bridget was mentioning around Shujaz, the power of posting their stories on social media, and then the young boys start having conversations amongst themselves, and it also sparks that that ability to say, how can we then take these conversations further. So I know also we always worry, particularly around format videos, that we always worry about young people have a very short attention span. But we are talking about an audience that binge watches series with 5 seasons, with episodes that are 45 minutes long, and they do that in 2 days. So what is it about those series that is so compelling, that drives them to just wanna watch them and they don't sleep? So if our stories are also real, they are raw, they are relatable and filled with emotions that young people can see themselves on screen, they will most definitely keep on engaging. They would learn, they'll engage their peers, which also brings me to the point around community engagement, which has been coming through powerfully in these 3 interventions. That in as much as we might have our content living online, living on social media, but how do we then take it back to our communities? Because at the end of the day, young people also want to hear stories of resilience. They want to hear stories of triumph, and it becomes so beautiful when they see that in their own settings. So peer engagements, we know for decades it has been working. So how do we then strengthen that? So in short, for me, honestly, listening to what everyone is doing, the amazing work they are doing, for us to really scale this up and to change how we are doing things, is let's continue with the multimedia approach, similar to what Shujaz is doing with SSK, where you are including communities, you are including social media, you are involving different broadcasters, so that when a young person is clicking on TikTok, we are talking about mental health. When they're watching TV, there's mental health being part of the conversation. When they are going to school, we are talking about period poverty. So let's not limit it to the certain platforms that we know. And in closing, I want to touch on this. Now going into what is exciting that is happening in the space, and considering all the funding cuts that have impacted a lot of our work. But what is exciting, especially in the entertainment education space? What can we look forward to? What is it that we can innovate on, something that hasn't been done, but also things that are working? How can we make sure that we keep them to be as authentic as they can be? So short form videos, they work where we have single themed stories. We've seen in our own work with our In Bloom campaign, where we are focusing on just one single story, and we can allow young people and our different audiences to just soak in on that theme. So we know, like, for instance, videos that are about 7 minutes, 10 minutes, they are catchy, they are vibrant, they are quick, but they are also real. So those ones, they work quite well because you can access them on your phone, you can access them on the go. And let's go to community theaters. We've met amazing people the production space where they know that community theaters, they work where you take youth from the community, they tell those stories, they act out those stories, they drive the conversations. Those things, they work. And I'm so happy that I've seen in our setting in South Africa that it's coming back quite a lot. And also the introduction of art as a tool for healing, particularly in schools where maybe adolescents and young people don't have the vocabulary to put into what they're feeling. Let's go back to introducing art as a tool to heal and to speak about our feelings. And also community engagement. This is key. You can never run away from it, where you have a group of peer educators or peer helpers, or however they are called in different settings, and they engage with their peers. We know peers trust their own age mates. They trust the information that they share with them because they live in the same setting. And let's continue to leverage technology. I know that in some conversations, people are skeptical when it comes to AI because of all the misinformation, of all the online bullying, of all the online, where people are just using technology to bully others. But we can also see the power of AI. We've seen in one organization that we are partnering up with in South Africa, where they have developed applications when it comes to mental health, where young people can just go on a chat box online on WhatsApp. I know that Shujaz is also doing something similar, which is wonderful, because if a young person is in a crisis moment and they cannot go to a counselor, they cannot go to a therapist, maybe they don't even have access to such, but they can go on their WhatsApp and seek help and have someone that they can engage with. So I think where I stand and where we stand as an organization, there's so much that we can do. We know that the young people that we are working with, that we are servicing, they're very dynamic. They are multifaceted. We can never look at just telling their stories in the lens of only HIV prevention, only sexual reproductive health, but there are also other issues that they're facing every
I'm
day.
so sorry. I'm going to interrupt you. I've
Yeah.
been really enjoying your
Oh,
remarks. I'm sure we all have, but we are over time, and I just want to
my apologies.
No, not at all.
Yeah,
It was
I'm
amazing.
done.
I wish we
Thank
had more
you.
time for you to share. I just really want to thank all of our panelists and Isa, and of course the audience, for helping us learn from each other today. I know you invested a lot of time making this happen. And following on the remarks we just heard, we hope you can take action from the results you've heard to engage youth and the people that matter to them, providing them with interactive opportunities for engaging with media. And next slide, please. We only had a moment to share a few learnings from our review. So we encourage you to download the report and the brief on the report. You can see them here on the QR code, and we'll send out the links afterwards. And next slide, please. We're also really excited to share this just hot off the press article that came out last week, which Beth and Doug Evans and others on the team just published around the insights on entertainment media and gender norms. So we also invite you to read more about the work there. And most excitingly, next slide, we now have our online social norms repository launched as of, I think, maybe 3 minutes ago. Here you can go online and you can read summaries about the studies that are reviewed in the evidence review. You can find links to them so you can dig in yourself, and really excitingly, you can see heat maps of what works and search by certain outcomes and research types. So you'll see the QR code there. I know this is all moving very fast, so we'll also send out the links to it so that you can go online and explore it and come to your own conclusions about the state of the evidence. And then finally, next slide. This is the last slide in a series of webinars that I think many of you have participated in. So I'd like to take the moment to really thank everyone who's participated in this scoping review. And a review of this scope really takes a village, and you can see all of the people that have been engaged from the project team, the advisory board, the learning collaboratives, and finally just wrap it up with a big thank you to the Gates Foundation for making this work possible. And of course, for all of you for joining and reading and being very engaged throughout this whole process. And with that, we'll follow up with the links and the slides, and looking forward to see how you all take this work forward. Thanks, everybody.